Right. All right. Okay. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, let's go. So welcome to session 3. Today we are going to be going over methods, Pygame events, and we'll be starting our game. So I guess just like a quick review. Um, Objects, they're like kind of like variables, except I would say the biggest difference between, objects, you can kind of think of them as a dictionary, except you can also store functions in these objects. And that kind of brings us to methods. So methods are basically um kind of like functions that are within a class. So kind of this slide here is kind of about showing like how a bunch of code would look without a function, right? And then over here, so once again, like I mentioned, methods are basically just functions that objects when I'm gonna start calling them instances from now on. So objects, instances within a class can call. Mm, so methods are basically, I mean, they're pretty much functions, but the one difference is that you include the self keyword here, and the reason that you include this keyword is so that the method can access like the instance variables. So that's like if the snake has like a variable called um say snake.name or something, right? Then you would be able to use like self.name. You would be able to access the self.name what is this called? You'd be able to access the instance variable in the function, and then you can like use it to do whatever you want. Mm, uh, I do not think this slide is too relevant, but it's kind of just saying like methods are basically the same thing as functions. So instead of like passing, person in the function, you can pass the self keyword. And once again, the self keyword, like we mentioned before, is just like a placeholder for the object itself. Mm, yeah, so here's kind of like an example of here's kind of an example of a method, and oh dear, what just happened? You can see like these two over here, they're methods, and I believe the next, no, it does not. I'll try to, yeah, I think there is an example as we go through. Okay, so you can also add like parameters to methods, and once again, like I mentioned this before, but like I said, the self keyword kind of lets you, if you have the self keyword in one of these um, as one of the parameters, then you can the method will be able to access the the instance variables as we call them. Like if you don't have the self keyword here, then it won't even know what self.x is. So that's kind of like the benefit of using methods instead of just like functions outside of a class. Yeah, so I believe we have our first quick question. So. mm, Okay. Oh, all right. So yeah, once again, like promised, now we have like an example of using methods. So there's actually two ways to call a method. You can actually call a method through a class, but we're not going to get into that. Most common way is you'll create an instance of the class. So for example, here it's like my snake have x value of 30, y value of 30, and then now that you have like an instance of the class, you can use the dot attribute to call function. So sorry, not dot attribute, the dot operator. Um, it's kind of like we mentioned, the dot operator allows you to like access parts of the instance. So in this case, it's like dot move up is accessing this move up function over here. So I kind of have an example here. So here we have like the snake class, right? And over here we initialize the object basically, giving it x value of 30, y value of 30. And so this is I already ran the output, but basically the first time you print the x and y, it's obviously 30 and 30, right? So now we want to run this mysnake.moveUp function, and what that does is over here it says, okay, change self, so change like this specific variable instances like y value by -1. So as you can see, the y value is the second one, so that actually gets changed to 29. And the move right function says change the x value, like add this distance to the x value. So this is like a parameter that you can actually enter into the what's it called again? The method. So once again, like self is kind of just there to give the functions access to the objects attributes and stuff. I guess while we're here, actually, I'm not gonna do this, but like you could create, say, another snake, right? You could be like this snake equals blah blah blah, and it would be initialized with 3030, and its instance variables would be separate from like the first snake. So that's kind of how it's like instances are a good way to like keep track of separate objects. Yeah, so methods, you can also have like a return value. So in this case, like the example saying like, so this might be something that you run in kind of like a while loop. Maybe it's like, is my snake off the screen? And so the way it works is every time this is run, right, it would be like my snake dot off screen. It's like, okay, is the snake basically is the snake off the screen? If yes, then set this value over here to true. So it looked like this. Oops, true, right? If not, then make it false. And in this case, it's just prints, but you would probably use it to check something else. Yeah, so that brings us to our first exercise. And I personally like encourage you to just like somebody somebody has a question. Okay, I will answer that right after I get to the exercise. Um, Personally, I kind of encourage you to just use your creativity with the exercise. Like you can really do anything. The key is that you use a class and you want to have like, let's see, you want to have two methods, one of which can, okay, you want to have a class and you want to have an at least like one instance variable. So like, self dot I don't know, HP or something like hit points. And then you want to have a function that can modify that instance variable and a function that can return the instance variable. But then again, like you can add as many other things as you want. So just like get creative, That's what I recommend. And yes, so I will answer not check a snake. Yeah, okay. So I actually think this code here in the previous slide is probably not the best example, but that wasn't the point of the code, but yes, good catch. Anyways, um, I imagine we can use like 15 minutes for this breakout room. Okay. Hmm. Okay. Mm, uh, yeah, so now we're going to be moving on to Pygame events. Uh, so if you kind of look in your Pygame file down over here, you should basically the first part in the loop section, you'll see like yeah, you'll see these like if keys press statements and stuff. So I think I kind of mentioned this before in maybe session one, but the Pygame events are basically like, well, pygame.event.get go to like a list of basically every single, I believe, keyboard and mouse input to the game. And then kind of what you do is, so how this code works is like it sets, basically it assigns a variable to this list. So like pygame.key.get pressed basically returns a list of all the stuff that's being pressed, and then we give it a variable so like it stops changing. Basically, like this is short form for saying like if keys pygame.key up is in keys pressed, then because it's like short form. It's saying like if this thing is in this list, then do this, and then yeah, so on. Oops. Really, we skipped a slide. Uh, yeah, so right now we kind of just set up everything so it's easy to use. Like right now, the arrow keys, this one's key up, key left, key right, key down. So you can just like put code into this place over here and it'll, sorry, then I'll just run this code whenever the key's pressed. Mm, you can also like replace these keys, especially if you want to do like WASD, then there's like a documentation. Okay, sorry. Okay, there's documentation so you can find all the keys. So we're just gonna skip that other slide, and there's gonna be an immediate quick question. So basically, once again, the key, sorry, the code inside this thing here runs when the key is pressed, right? And then your if statements to figure it out. Okay. Um, yeah. So I guess like I can quickly go through the quick question. What is following code is run when the right arrow and number 4 are pressed at the same time. So yeah. So once again, since this is kind of just like if statement logic, the first key, since both of these are true, then the right key gets triggered first. So this one gets triggered, and else if does not get triggered, then this if statement doesn't really have anything to do with the previous two keys. So you get the number pressed as well. So one thing to note when, especially for like character movement, if you have like a sort of line that goes like, obviously these are bad examples, but if you imagine like this is say right and this is left, and you have like both of them are if statements, and then someone says like, if you're setting like velocities, if your game uses like velocity, so like, vel x equals 5 and whatever, then like if both keys are pressed at the same time, like the bottom one always takes precedence. So that's just like something to keep in mind when, designing games. Sometimes you don't want to, oopsie, what I do. Yeah. Okay. So moving on, we also have mouse events. So mouse events are basically stored as tuples. So it's kind of like immutable lists, like lists that you can't modify the values of. So if you were to print like pygame.mouse.get position, you get something like, I don't know, it'd probably be, I think it's decimals. You might get 22.3 and 400 is your mouse position. It depends on where it is. And this thing also runs like, if you ever try to print this thing, usually when you're moving the mouse position, it keeps on updating. So it'll be like a non-stop string of, I guess it's always non-stop, but there's also like, for mouse buttons, it's also a tuple. So it's like, um, I think it would look something like true, true. Well, actually, everything would be false if nothing's being clicked, right? Basically, you have a 3-value tuple, depending on which one of the mouse buttons is being pressed. And then, okay, so we're moving on to the exercise already. So I guess like just a quick tip before we do the exercise. Yeah, so basically you want to have a rectangle that can like move around using the arrow keys, and then there's like bonuses you can add like teleports. I mean, if you really want, you can also start like designing your game. If you have any game ideas in mind, you can be like, okay, maybe I want to add like an HP variable, even if you don't know exactly what you're gonna do with it, right? You can add like simple collision detection, but I think we'll go into that in future sessions. But obviously, there's a documentation if you want to go ahead. I guess I'll just quickly go through like something I made here. So just using like the snake function from before. Basically, we define like these two methods, right? Create the snake, and so this is kind of a hint. Like if you want to figure everything out on your own, you might not want to look right now. But what I did is I have like, so this rect argument here for the initiation of the snake. I just pass in like a Pygame object, and it's just like one of the easier ways to work with it. And so what that lets me do is, you don't actually have to use a Pygame rect. You can also use like a list and just change like the values in the list. And then down here, it's like, okay, draw a rectangle using onto the screen, given this color, right? So like green, and use the rect attribute, the coordinates of the MySnake object. And then in the keys, this is not a complete answer, but I basically have like calling the methods, right? Move right, move down. And so it does not have any up or left functionality, but works. Yeah, I kind of just went through that because I wanted to make sure if I didn't explain the objects well enough, well, now I have, so hopefully. And I guess we can have pretty much the rest of the session. So good luck, everyone. And end of session poll, and then everyone can go.